Cyber Innovations in the Private Sector highlights case studies and the latest industry trends from private vendors. Explore innovative solutions, success stories, and exclusive insights from industry leaders. Stay ahead with the cutting-edge developments driving the industry forward.
Hello. With quantum technology rapidly evolving from lab curiosity to commercial infrastructure, the question is no longer if, but when quantum cryptography will reshape digital security. Today, we are joined by Professor André Xuereb, Malta's Ambassador for Digital Affairs and a pioneer in quantum optics. Hi, André, how are you?
Hello, Nicholas. I'm doing very well, thank you.
André, let's start a bit about yourself. How do you get here? How do you get into quantum?
That's a good question. I always enjoyed science and physics and mathematics, that sort of thing. And after I finished my first degree in Malta, which was in maths and physics, I decided to fish around for a few PhD positions. And the one which came, the group which came back to me with a positive reply, and which I liked most, was a physics group. So this was 2007. Between then and now, what's changed is that, as you said in the introduction, quantum has moved a lot from the laboratory to the real world, and that kind of sucked me in. This idea that when I was studying these ideas, everything was up in the air, everything was abstract, and now we're seeing these technologies actually making a mark in the real world. And this is absolutely fantastic. And yes, if I was interested back then, now I'm super keen on being part of this revolution, shall we say.
What makes it fundamentally different from encryption system used today on the internet?
Absolutely. So yes, here we're talking about quantum cryptography, quantum key distribution, quantum communication. Very often they all mean the same thing. Now, this is fundamentally different to how we send data on the internet today. And in particular, it allows us to do cryptography, encryption in a completely different way. Very broadly speaking, in standard encryption, standard cryptography, there are two broad classes. One is symmetric cryptography, where you and I meet, we exchange some codes, some numbers, we go on our separate ways, and then we use these codes, these numbers, to encrypt and decrypt information. That's called symmetric because the codes used to encrypt and decrypt turns out to be the same code. Then there is asymmetric cryptography, which is there to solve a big problem with symmetric cryptography. So symmetric cryptography is great, but it requires us to meet. Asymmetric cryptography means that we don't need to meet, but we can still set up a secure communications channel. This is what the S in HTTPS stands for. This is how we connect to our banks, do online shopping, etc., etc. Now, all of this is based on quite a big mathematical edifice, which unfortunately is not bulletproof. So it is possible to sniff the traffic that's going on between two nodes over this kind of encrypted link and eventually break into it, so kind of reverse engineer the encryption. Now, this is not presently feasible because only quantum computers are known to make this process more efficient. Okay, so with quantum computers, one would be able to basically break pretty much any encryption that we are using nowadays on the internet. On the other hand, there's quantum security, quantum cryptography, etc. Call it what you want. What that technology does is it basically creates a new physical layer underlying our communication system. So it has to be a physical link. And this physical link distributes the encryption keys. And it uses the power of quantum mechanics, the laws of the universe, so to speak, such that when the keys are distributed between point A and point B, one has certainty, one knows for a fact that the key cannot have been eavesdropped upon, cannot have been stolen by someone else in transit. And that gives you a way to set up effectively a bulletproof encrypted connection between those 2 points.
And you helped establish Malta's first quantum optic group. From theory to real-world infrastructure, how close are we to deploying quantum communication networks at scale?
When I first started in Malta, there was basically nothing, which was amazing. We could kind of grow a research stream suited to the environment, suited to how the country works, suited to the students we have, which was great. And we eventually started doing a lot of work on quantum cryptography and quantum communications, because as an island, we're small enough that it's easy to set up quantum links. And we're also connected to Italy via short link, so we could do some really, really cool experiments, between the two countries. And this kind of introduced us to the field. Slowly, as I said, kind of these laboratory ideas have started shifting to the real world. And we are now in a situation where, in fact, I am involved through Mercury, my company. We're involved in rolling out, in deploying an actual real world quantum secured network, effectively spanning the entire country. This is within a framework called the European Quantum Communications Infrastructure, spearheaded by the European Commission. So yeah, we are at the point where these networking technologies, these ideas can actually be used today in the real world, and we're demonstrating that in Malta.
You are a Malta's ambassador for digital affairs. What does policy need to catch up with the science in quantum tech? And are governments moving fast enough?
As ambassador for digital affairs, part of what I do effectively means looking at how countries are coming together to understand the opportunities and threats coming out of emerging technologies like AI, like quantum, and perhaps putting some guardrails around those technologies as and when required. And AI is a very good example of this, even perhaps more so than quantum at the moment. Now, quantum technologies do present a few problems from the point of view of governance, of diplomacy. First of all, an organization, a country that has access to a full-scale quantum computer will be able to break present-day cryptography. That is a lot of power for someone to have. And if that goes unchecked, then there are lots of issues that could precipitate from that, both for the private sector, but also for relationships between states. Just take an example, Malta's internet traffic flows through Italy, France, and perhaps a few other places. If actors in those countries had access to this technology, they could basically snoop on anything that Malta is saying. So there are serious diplomatic repercussions to this. On the other hand, of course, if someone had access to a full-blown quantum key distribution system end-to-end, they could communicate without being able to, without anyone being able to eavesdrop or wiretap them, even legally. So that's kind of the negatives, perhaps. Then there's also the positives. Again, if we have a situation where there's a concentration of technologies, of quantum technologies in the global north, for example, which is well known to be the case. That means that the countries in the global north will benefit most from the benefits, like perhaps new drug discoveries, new material discoveries, and so on, that these devices will give them access to. Can we diplomatically create a way to help the countries in the global south participate from this revolution, or at least benefit more from it?
From quantum key distribution to post-quantum algorithms, there are competing approaches. Which do you believe offer the most resilience against future quantum attacks?
I don't actually believe they are competing approaches. They are certainly complementary approaches. At the simplest level, one is a hardware solution, the other is a software solution. They're not doing the same thing. They're not fulfilling the same thing. So for the uninitiated, when we're talking about post-quantum cryptography, we're basically saying the issues which I mentioned earlier about our communication systems being unsafe against the quantum threat, those issues arise from the algorithms, the encryption algorithms that we use. So can we create new encryption algorithms which do not suffer from the same issues? And the answer is probably yes. So NIST in the US issued a list of 4 or 5 of these algorithms, for example, spanning both cryptography and certification, or signature, excuse me. And these algorithms are called post-quantum cryptographic algorithms. Now, what they are is a set of algorithms which are safe against the threats we know about today from quantum computers. We don't know what quantum computers will be capable of doing. We don't have a good understanding of that, of the complexity space, so to speak. So it is not possible presently to mathematically prove that these post-quantum algorithms are actually safe against quantum computers. However, they can be rolled out quite straightforwardly under many circumstances. So many popular messaging apps, for example, have already started transitioning to post-quantum cryptography, which is absolutely great, which is a really, really good first step. However, when you start going on, consolidating data and moving towards kind of the backbone of a network, the backbone of the internet, the backbone of your data center setup, there is a lot more data being consolidated there. And then this idea of someone being able to make a copy of the data now, which is encrypted, sit on it for a few years, and then eventually break into it using a quantum computer, this store now, decrypt later attack. That attack starts becoming very viable when you're applying it to backbone networks or data centers or so on. The only thing we know which can absolutely stop this attack in its tracks is quantum key distribution.
How should major institutions, from banks to telecoms, start preparing today for a quantum secure future?
There are some statements being put out by the European Commission, by individual countries, aimed at the public sector, mostly public sector organizations, either mandating or encouraging these organizations to start shifting towards post-quantum cryptography now or very, very, very soon. I would encourage private sector organizations like banks and the others to shadow or mirror the same developments, because what's good for public sector organizations in this case is also good for private sector organizations. However, those organizations that do handle large amounts of data that does need to be kept secure for 5, 10, 15, 20, sometimes even more than that years, and who have a strong physical infrastructure like a network of data centers or strong backbone infrastructure, those organizations I would recommend very strongly to look into complementing this with quantum key distribution, because as I said, it is the only way at the moment to be bulletproof for the future.
Can you share a project from your lab that signals what's coming next?
I will actually not talk about anything quantum, but one of the activities we've been involved in for several years now is a kind of a quantum adjacent activity, and that is being able to distribute time and frequency signals. So we all have our watches, our computers are all synchronized and so on, but as it turns out, it's a very difficult problem to synchronize atomic clocks and synchronize the most precise atomic clocks. If they're not synchronized, they're useless, because my atomic clock will not match with yours, so what is the point of having them? So it's important to synchronize. And we were involved in some activities to understand how to use the telecommunications network, including submarine fibers, to synchronize these networks. Out of that, as an aside, we ended up developing a system that allows us to use the telecommunications network to monitor small earthquakes and other disturbances on the sea. So we are potentially seeing the emergence of a completely new way to kind of listen in on the earth and maybe start finding evidence for small tremors, which nowadays might go completely unnoticed, leading up to eventual big catastrophic earthquakes.
What role do you believe Malta can play in European global quantum tech ecosystem?
There's a couple of things which Malta is good at. Partly because of its size, density, whatever, and partly because of the way our legislative process and lean legislative process, shall I say, work. So on the one hand, I would actually point at the quantum network we're building at the moment. That network only works because Malta is small enough, connected enough, and dense enough that we can actually deploy ordinary quantum devices from present-day technology, and we can use those to demonstrate what networks will look like 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now when they are fully integrated into our workflows. And again, kind of this can be reprised in different ways. Kind of this idea of having a small country as a test bed that allows you to demonstrate things which otherwise would be more expensive or just simply impossible to do in a larger environment. The other side of it, we do have a fairly lean legislative process with a couple of very good regulators already set up. And as we talked about earlier, there are some regulatory concerns around quantum tech computing and communications in particular. And one could argue that just like with AI, just like with virtual financial assets and cryptocurrencies and so on, these regulatory concerns are best served through a kind of a technical regulator that understands the tech, but can also understand where the guardrails should be for companies working in that space to operate in.
André, I will have to thank you very much for being here today with us, and I hope we can engage soon in another conversation about quantum and your work on your company, Mercury.
Sincere pleasure. Thank you.